Okay.
We're all about positive affirmation here.
And my
Okay.
question will guide you. So the way it's constructed, you'll know what we're looking for there.
Oh, yeah. Listen, you'll be able to go get a cup of coffee and come back while he asks you the question. So, don't worry about that.
I'm having thoughts and things I want to say that I'm choosing not to because I'm above that.
You are above that.
Welcome to an all-new episode of Work in Progress with John Lane and Will Barfield. This podcast explores leadership traits under stress with a special guest each week. We use a simple and accurate OAD assessment to identify key personality traits or superpowers, as well as the shadow side, kryptonite traits that appear when we're under stress. As always, we'll have some pod banter, shameless plugging, and we'll even let our guests talk for a bit. Of course, no humble brags. Welcome to the show.
So I'm going to give us a 3, 2, 1, and we're going to get going.
That's right.
3, 2, 1. All right, everybody. Welcome to a brand new live episode of Work in Progress with John Lane and Will Barfield. Will, how you doing? I caught you off guard. That was my intent.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'm good. Head on a swivel, baby. So I'm ready for you.
Mid countdown, I got you. Okay, so I don't have a lot of banter today.
What?
Maybe you've brought something and prepared. We'll see. But this weekend I edited episode 26, which are all out of order now, with our friend James Sill.
Yes.
OG. And I believe we told that was the week you were getting your surgery. And you were going to keep your workday on Thursday as planned, despite the good advice from your wife. So we have to revisit that. Good choice, bad choice. How was?
So I'm glad you asked me that. That's very sweet of you to check in on me. So Wednesday came back from the surgery. It was outpatient, 45 minutes. They put you to sleep, not super deep. And then, I came home and rested and just basically slept the rest of Wednesday. Thursday got up and worked. When the day started, I was somewhat regretting the decision. Left arm, I didn't have feeling all the way back in it yet. They put a nerve block, so they do injections here. This is my left, although it looks like on the right side here, and then it basically numbed my arm for about 26 hours completely. So it's just a dead limb. So by the time I got up here to work, it was, not really functioning super well. The doctor was kind enough that when he put the splint on me, he bent the arm to a way that I could type. So I was probably 75% capacity on Thursday, and then was full speed on Friday.
Were you grouchy? Did you snap at anybody? Were you aloof or brusque, as your kryptonite suggests? That's really what we wanted to get to. Thank you.
Yes, you want me to
post-op description?
You want me to treat you that way right now?
Yeah.
Come on. Stop asking me those questions.
Did you use any new tools while you were half in commission? Like maybe
Baileys,
ChatGPT to do your job for you?
No, it's just morning Baileys. Yeah, I mean,
that works.
Take the edge off that, and a couple thousand milligrams.
I had a White Russian this weekend. I was in St. Louis visiting my sister-in-law, and I had a White Russian for the first time in many, many years. So but I do remember putting some Kahlua in my coffee during COVID.
John, next show, White Russians.
Yes.
I mean, the dude who buys.
What I want to know is what series of bad decisions before the White Russian led up to having the White Russian.
Don't share.
Right,
you don't have to.
Let's get this going. He is Will Barfield.
He is John Lane.
And we are
a work in
progress. Sam, thanks for being here. We've been talking with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
A while. Don't step over me. I'm still talking. I'm glad that you're here. Now it's your turn to talk. Why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
So hey everyone. My name is Sam, and I currently live in Raleigh, from New York originally, but I've moved around quite a bit, including some stints in Houston, New York City, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and England. And let's see, a little bit about me. Started off out of college as a former educator, so was a teacher in Teach for America, and it surprisingly taught me a lot, not only about things that I do in my career today, which is a lot more data analytics and marketing focused, but it also kind of taught me about the impact and the opportunity to give back. Um, and that's a little bit about me, and excited to be here and kind of get a chance to talk to you guys a bit more.
Ooh, I got a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Can I ask a question, John?
It's your show.
No, it's not. It's yours. So how'd you find out about us in this show, Sam? What led to you being here?
Yeah, so Will, you were one of my very first, I think, contacts back when I moved to Raleigh a couple of years ago. And I feel like you were someone that knew a little bit of everyone in Raleigh. So I think there's someone who recommended to me that I reach out to you. And I think we had a conversation all those years ago. And then the way I got to know John was I was very involved in the American Marketing Association. There's a Triangle chapter here. And I knew a guy named Lee Folger. I actually got a chance to see him the other week at Brett Beat, which was a great conference in Durham about the tech scene. So we actually got a chance to run into each other again. And but yeah, he recommended that I talk to you, John. So then we had a conversation, and then here we are.
I think I brought you breakfast. I think I brought you breakfast at the City Club.
You did? Yes, you did. Yeah.
Lee introduced me and John too.
So I don't know if we have to financially disclose that for the podcast, but yeah.
Yeah, well, there'll be a report going out to keep up with that. All right. So do you want to tell anybody where you work or what you do for a living, given this is a professional oriented podcast?
Yeah, so I feel my current career and where I'm at is I'm at the intersection of marketing, analytics, MarTech, growth, optimization, go-to-market. And the reason why I just use all those different adjectives and things to describe is because I feel like marketing is undergoing a pretty giant transformation. And so day to day, I currently work at a agency that is focused on analytics and marketing technology. But I've kind of often found myself at the intersection at a lot of those things, sometimes leaning a lot more into the data technical side of marketing, other times leaning more into growth. Had the chance to work at a startup company, was employee number 6, and had a chance to build a sales and marketing team from the ground up. Also worked at a big education company, about 40,000 employees, agency side, client side. So I feel like I've had the opportunity to see a lot of different things out there. But marketing is undergoing a giant transformation. And so I feel like go-to-market is now the new inbound marketing. And even there's a post the other day, I was looking at LinkedIn, of how even just within the past 3 years, I think COVID had just accelerated a lot of the trends that we were currently seeing. And so I kind of, which we'll probably talk a little bit about later, I often find myself being pulled into a lot of different directions in terms of what I might want to do next or what I might be interested in. And I think that could be both a positive thing and a curse in terms of always feeling like I need to learn the next thing to kind of keep up with it. But I know it can be kind of intimidating because there are so many things to explore out there. And of course, the more you learn, the more you realize of just how much you don't know. So,
Will, we got a live one.
Yeah. I try not to learn so that I'm not aware of what I don't know.
That's true. Well, I mean, ignorance is bliss for a reason. So, you know.
Definition here. Go, John, go.
All right, kids. So our whipsters know that every week we talk about leadership traits under stress, and the way we acquire those leadership traits is using the OAD assessment, which is a very easy to use, very powerful, very accurate assessment. And Sam, like every 30 guests before him, has undergone it. We've analyzed his results, and we're going to talk about it. So today I will show you that without a pointer, this is why I drew the pointer in there, that on the OAD leadership matrix, he is also a socially oriented generalist, like I am, and like many of our guests are, and we'll someday we'll write a paper as to why so many are. But let's get into this. So we'll ask him the question.
I will. Sam, you've lived a good life so far. You've experienced a lot. How does it feel to have everything about you compressed into a two-dimensional table here. Is that intimidating at all?
No, I think it's I mean, you have a chance to classify people some way. So if
Yeah.
this is a good place to start, I think it's a good place to, begin the conversation. So, I mean, people have, well, before, when Twitter was 140 characters, you had to kind of sum up a big idea or a thought. Can be done, not necessarily the easiest thing, but yeah, I think it's a good starting point.
Awesome.
John, tell us about him. What's he look like?
I will. So Sam, like me, is a builder negotiator, but as you see from that high quality graphic, he is a variation. So I'll just go through the usual. Everyone remembers that on the OAD leadership matrix, your traits here, your constructs are relative, and that's how you get into a box. So we look at your A versus your D. If A is greater than D, which it is, you are a generalist. If your E is greater than your D, you are socially oriented. So that puts him in the socially oriented box. Variation means that while A is greater than D, they are to the left of that little red line, which means they are subordinate. And so that's an interesting conversation, because while the 2x2 box holds up, unlike other builder negotiators, the A is not assertive in this case. And so when it's not, when it's not dominant, you have a little bit of a different personality traits and style. So let's get into that. So we're going to talk about generic Will. So remember, he's a variation of a builder. So why don't you take over?
I will do that, and thank you for double clicking on the variation piece, John, because this tool and technology, it drops people into quadrants, but it also is going to point out when it's not necessarily formulaic. And
Right.
Sam, as a result of his answers to the assessment, came out as a variation. That said, Sam, we're on the generic page. Okay, these are the superpower strengths that will show as a readout for anyone who lands in the upper right red quadrant with a builder negotiator profile. Of these, which trait do you feel like you agree with, others would agree with, is kind of the one on there that speaks to you, that launches off the page?
Yeah, I think so. Looking here, the one that jumps out to me the most is the optimistic demeanor. I tend to think that I do tend to see the glass half full, maybe in a Ted Lasso type style. And I think,
Hang on.
Go for it. Yeah.
Will, what is our unofficial motto?
No humble brags.
Do you think somebody comparing themselves to Ted Lasso is a humble brag?
I mean, you're on the line there. Yeah, I think so.
I think
Possibly.
so.
How do you feel about that?
I think it's a classic humble brag. So we haven't been able to call one of these. Well,
You
James
called me. I was the last one that got called out for that, and I'm the
that's true. And then James called one out on me on the episode
He
live,
did.
but it wasn't recorded, so there's no evidence. So that means it didn't happen. But I think it's the first time our guests tried to. And let's just say, Sam, if you're gonna pull off a humble brag, calling yourself a Ted Lasso, that's a good one.
It's time to go to the dark side. When we're talking about the kryptonite that's on this generic readout, Sam, is there one of these that stands out to you as most accurate, others would agree with, really lands with you?
Yeah. So I know we'll talk about this a little bit more later on as well. I think from this list, the one that jumps out to me is the third one. So can definitely become too concerned with pleasing others.
So we're back to superpowers here, Sam, and you went through the OAD assessment. John shared the readout with you, and then you kind of commented on some things and penned some notes that were personal and sent those to us in advance of today's show. So you picked these. Can you kind of scan that and talk a little bit about why you wrote what you wrote about these particular superpower factors?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm just I, as you kind of said, I'm a little bit more of an outlier for kind of what this personality trait kind of involves,
Right.
and so along with that, I do tend to find myself interested in a lot of different things and kind of see oftentimes where growth can happen is at the intersection of kind of different people thoughts or ideas, and so that's kind of where the curiosity comes in. And like I mentioned, as a former educator,
Yep.
that's when you get an opportunity to see the light bulb turn off on above someone else's head, when you're able to kind of explain something succinctly and get them to understand either where you're coming from or what you are thinking about. For me, that is a big kind of a big high in terms of being able to help them kind of unlock things, like how as well. And then for the analytics side, that's kind of what I do a bit more in my day-to-day job. And so it is an oftentimes very noisy world. And so getting a chance to ask why is something that I think is a question that is not asked often enough. And yeah, when it comes to vulnerability, I'm a big fan of kind of what Brene Brown has talked a lot about when it comes to vulnerability. And I feel like you can't have personal or professional growth without vulnerability. And oftentimes, people can say that it's okay to be open and vulnerable. But actually, like in my day job as someone who helps other companies learn how to do experimentation, when you have talked to someone and they say they're willing to experiment, being willing to experiment means that you don't know the answer, and saying I don't know the answer, but I actually want to be able to help find it or help understand it and kind of experiment to get to that point. I think that takes a lot of vulnerability and courage, and I think it's really easy to say but not as easy to do. And so I think that's kind of how some of those things all tie together.
Well, I really appreciate, and I know John does too, that you've really emphasized the vulnerability piece. That's a big part of show here.
Mhm.
Looking at these superpowers, looking at our kryptonite, looking at strengths and weaknesses as leaders, being willing to admit the vulnerability, the mistakes, and hopefully the whipsters who consume this content, take some of that away each time. I had the advantage of knowing you for a while. You and I've had more than one conversation about career. You've
Mhm.
come to me with some questions. I've come to you with opportunities. I'll tell you this, you are an interesting mix of that enthusiasm and positivity and openness and hope. But also, when you need to lean on your career strengths and training, that analysis and those types of things. When we've talked about career opportunities, you've really thoughtfully broken them down
Mhm.
and asked for time to research and make sure that you're making the right decision. So there's nothing about this builder negotiator profile, John, with Sam, that is in a rush to judgment. And I think that's very interesting when we talk about the variation piece.
Mhm.
My experience with him is that he has a lot of those builder negotiator traits, but
Yeah.
that he's you know very thoughtful and process oriented and analytical as well. And
Yeah.
I think that's why that works well with his career.
That inverse P is so high relative
Yes.
to the A. That's one of the things that is different than a standard builder negotiator.
So kryptonite, you
Mhm.
know, one of our first guests, Sarah Glover, talked about the shadow side, and I like to reference that every once in a while. When stress is high, things get hard, challenges erupt, our superpowers invert. They become our kryptonite, and the things that
Mhm.
make us, great can make us weak. You commented here these bullets. Why don't you talk a little bit about
Yeah.
why you selected these particular things to discuss?
Yeah. So when it comes to analytics, I think one of the biggest lessons is, you don't want to have perfect be the enemy of good enough, because you need to know when to take action and when to move forward.
Yeah.
And I know for myself, that is one of the biggest things that I do struggle with is uh, I tend to be an optimizer to a fault.
Mhm.
And sometimes I do try to find the perfect solution. So I'm the type of person that will spend, 8 hours to make sure that the bed sheets I get are the best possible bed sheets I could possibly get. Because if I can't perfect in the bed sheets and I can't perfect my sleep, then I know that just kind of leads down a slippery slope. But
Yep.
ultimately, it's about control. It's letting go of kind of that control that oftentimes we don't necessarily have. But it's the semblance of showing that you actually do have control over things when in reality you do to a certain degree. But I think for a lot of things, going with the flow tends to be a bit more of a good state. And so I do tend to look back and think, could I have done that better? And I think to a certain degree that can be a healthy practice. But when that reflection sometimes becomes an obsession, then I think it becomes a bit more paralyzing, because then you're stuck kind of looking in the mirror rather than kind of looking at the path ahead. And that is oftentimes, where I sometimes find myself. And then you combine that with high expectations and, the vulnerability side. I think what I have learned, and I think some of my biggest lessons, is including making sure that other people, you can't really expect other people necessarily to meet you where you are in terms of vulnerability.
Right.
And so I think, Brene Brown would say, do they have an opportunity to be there in the arena with you? And sometimes when you are open or vulnerable, there are other people or parties that are not necessarily either ready for that or necessarily need that. And so I think balancing your own need to for being vulnerable and open yourself, where some people might not be ready for that. I think that's something that I've grown a lot, because that not everyone feels kind of about those thoughts and feelings about vulnerability in the same way you might. And I think that's I think especially a larger challenge for our society to kind of help navigate, to kind of meet people where they are, rather than kind of expecting that the openness that you might show might not be where other people are too.
Love the analysis. Speaking of analysis, beautiful segue, Mr. Lane. Sam, so, you don't take assessments every day. It's not a hobby. You went through this exercise with us, and we appreciate it. But hopefully, as you did, there were some things that you uncovered that were new. There were some things that you were reminded of that were familiar, and maybe some things that all of that can be kind of bundled up and carried forward. Going through this process with us, going through this show with us today, what did you gain, gather, and benefit? How can you apply the OAD results and then this discussion to what you're trying to do in your current role, what you're trying to do moving forward professionally? How do you apply these leadership lessons?
Yeah, I think that doing an assessment like this helps you better identify, what your potential blind spots might be. And it really, and kind of going back to an example that I kind of gave, but adding a little bit more color to it. I was in a role where when I talked about the opportunity for growth and when I talked about vulnerability, I think it was something that I was craving, but the culture for where I was, that was not necessarily the culture aligned with where I was in the past. And so as I kind of had the opportunity to be open and vulnerable, it unfortunately did not really go the way that I hoped, or the way that it kind of seemed, because I think I forgot to kind of moderate my expectations, and also kind of it was trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Yes.
In terms of really trying to have an opportunity that maybe on paper looks perfect. But then in reality, once you kind of start peeling back the layers of the onion and kind of going a little bit deeper beneath the surface, I think, it's easy for places or organizations or even groups or teams of people to kind of say what their culture or what their values are. And I think oftentimes you can't, it's not just simply something you say. I think it's a lot more involved with the actions that you have. Yeah. And it's by what you see there with those, it's not just simply a poster. It's kind of like what is weaved into kind of the bones of a team or a culture or a structure. And so I think going through the survey, I've become much more aware of how to meet people, I think, where they are when it comes to openness and vulnerability. and then also, how to try to better align organizational culture where it's not necessarily about getting everyone on the same page, but really kind of helping dive deeper into a better understanding of who they are, and then where do they want to go, and then how do you kind of help them get there. And so vulnerability has kind of added another layer to that, and I think that's that's kind of what I think about a bit more these days.
Appreciate that very much.
Yeah.
Okay, so you went through this process, jumped on the pod, listened to John and I and our silliness, and then went through this analysis exercise and open discussion. Who can you think of that you interact with, professionally, either presently or in the past, that left an impression on you, is another leader like you who could benefit from being on the show with us and would enjoy it and participate? Who's next?
Person that comes top of mind for me is someone that I worked really closely when I was more closely involved with the American Marketing Association here in the Triangle. And it's a former president, and her name is Misty Wilson, is who I would recommend. And she was actually someone that, in addition to being a very close friend and someone that I looked up to professionally, she helped energize the chapter during COVID, when it was a pretty tumultuous time. So I think she displayed a lot of leadership then, and she was someone who I think I've had the opportunity to be very, very open and very vulnerable with her in a way that I haven't really been with as many people. And I think she would be an excellent person that you might like to talk to.
Sam's been a long time coming. As Will said earlier, I'm John Lane.
And I am Will Barfield.
And we are a work in progress. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
Thank you, Sam. Enjoyed it, my
Thanks,
friend.
guys.
Good to see you virtually.
Presentation of Slipshod Productions. Available on LinkedIn and YouTube. Executive produced and starring John Lane and Will Barfield. Talent booking, production, and editing by John Lane. Thanks for watching. See you next week.